continue to our second panelist, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge Del Komitas from the Armenian Apostolic Church for being with us here today. I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge Consul of the Republic of Armenia, Suren Vartanyans. Our local elected officials, I'd like to recognize the Mayor of Glendale, Mr. Zade Sinanyan. I'd also like to mention and recognize the City Clerk of the City of Glendale, Mr. Artashis Ardikasaki. From the Glendale Unified School District Board of Directors, Ms. Armine Garbetian. And from the City of Glendale Parks and Recs Commission, Mr. Bartan Garbetian. Continuing on our discourse, I'd like to hand the floor over to Mr. Anthony Portantino to speak about local, state, and federal related issues regarding the Armenian genocide and the Armenian community. Mr. Portantino.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the Almena and Arawa chapter for holding this event and inviting me to participate. It is quite an honor to be here and to sit on a panel with such distinguished, accomplished people. And I know the earlier panel this morning was also quite impressive. Powerful in discussing and addressing the genocide, and obviously talk about atrocities of all genocides as the conversation continues. So thank you for letting me participate in that. My connection, my sort of passion and appreciation goes back to my time in New Jersey. I'm so glad you mentioned President Woodrow Wilson. Because as a New Jersey native, there was an understanding. There was, I don't know if it was in school or just around the dinner table, but I remember my mother talking about the Armenian genocide. And growing up in New Jersey, it is discussed outside of the Armenian American community. And to think what just happened last week in Washington was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee 12-5 vote being led by Senator Menendez from New Jersey. So it makes me feel proud, even more proud to be here. And coincidentally, when I first moved to California and I first got active and became an activist, many of the Armenian American activists that I met had connections to the East Coast. Rafi Amparian was one of the first people that I met from New Jersey. Artie Kasaki is from Boston. So again, the warmth and the welcome and the appreciation has always been there from day one. My connection as a political leader goes back to my time on the Locking Out of London City Council when I became mayor in 2001. I believe I was the first mayor of the city of Locking Out of Flintridge to offer a proclamation commemorating and recognizing the genocide. So I was proud to bring that issue to my small community every year since. What I find beneficial and powerful is having conversations like that. I think we're doing this the 99th year, and we're going to continue for the entire year leading up to the 100th anniversary. And I learned something at every one of these events. And I think that's the power of the conversation is, obviously, I don't have family members who suffer. But as a leader, it's incumbent upon me, it's incumbent upon us to continue to educate and to continue to be educated. And last year, sitting at the cathedral in Burbank, they had the Turkish historian bring the documents. I don't know if you were there that night, but he brought the documents that talked about the quotas and actually detailed in statistical analysis. Essentially, you're not killing enough people, kill more. It was one of the most powerful presentations I've ever been in a room to hear. And to think that was the mindset. You're not killing enough people, no more. And to think about taking that message back to Sacramento, where I'm proud to say every year for the past almost 20 years, the state of California does a resolution recognizing and commemorating the genocide, which they just did again last week. So California has been on the forefront of that. Though I will say, there have been attempts, even in California, with a significant and thriving Armenian American community, there have been attempts over the years to water down the resolution, to where some of the factual word choices get challenged. 3 years ago, when there was a significant focus on returning the church properties back, there was an attempt by some to say, we don't want to include the language that addressed the churches. That's going too far. And there's been attempts by both the Azerbaijanis and others to lobby in the halls of Sacramento against some of the proactive efforts to properly identify and properly educate Californians about the genocide. So it's good that we do it, but don't think for a moment that there are others who oppose it. And don't think for a moment that there are others that don't try to influence the drafting of the language right here in California. Locally, we've seen in local politics, we've seen tremendous strides of elected representatives. We have 3 here today. But again, don't think for a moment that there isn't ethnic, political issues that don't come up during campaigns. We saw recently in the selection of Democratic delegates to the Democratic Party, we saw efforts to dissuade Armenian Americans from voting. It was actually detailed in the Glendale News Press, efforts to identify folks who came in and disqualify them from voting based on their accents. That happened. That can't happen. That shouldn't happen. And it happened. Now on the positive side, just today, I know I saw a number of folks from Burbank raise their hands. I was at Burbank High School, and the junior state program has a slogan that they were handing out buttons, and I left mine in the car. I wish I had brought it with me here. It said, "Don't hate, debate." And so what makes me optimistic and excited is that young people, regardless of where they were born, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what their parents or grandparents may have done, are coming together and getting it. And what a wonderful slogan. Don't hate, debate. And they have t-shirts and buttons, and they spread that goodwill. And they write legislation, and they lobby their leaders to get that message. So that made me feel very excited to be around young people who were so positive. Now in Pasadena, locally, we are building a wonderful, wonderful monument to commemorate the genocide of 99 years ago. And our plan is to have it constructed by the 100th anniversary. And April 27th, Sunday night at 6 o'clock, we are going to be blessing the ground where the memorial is going to be built. And many of you know the poem, The Dance from Siamanto, and it talked about the inhumanity of man to man by the roadside. That was the inspiration that the artist used, and the photographs of the tripods where the intelligentsia, where the intellectuals, where the artists were hung by the Turks. This artist was so captivated by those images that she's used that stark tripod as the centerpiece of the memorial. And at the center, a teardrop will fall every 21 seconds. And every 21 seconds in a year is 1.5 million tears. And those tears will fall into the eternity center. And then the memorial will be flanked by pomegranate trees to respect and commemorate the regions of our region. And that has been unanimously approved by the city of Pasadena to be placed in Pasadena Memorial Park. To include the red copy because of their significance. Again, that's a very, very positive move forward for a region to recognize and commemorate in a city-owned park the genocide. But when it was first proposed, there was opposition from the Turkish government. Right here locally, that opposition came forward to say this isn't appropriate, this isn't something that a city should do. And so when you see a Pasadena City Council member out there, give them a thumbs up because they embraced this idea from the get-go. A broad-based group of community members has come together to be on the board of directors. I'm proud to be the only non-Armenian American. I've been adopted to be on the board. Maybe it's because I say Yankalava all the time. So, and I should have said Parayeri Go when I first started. To me, again, to be on a board of talented people who care so deeply, to make a statement right here in the San Gabriel Valley of how important it is to commemorate the Armenian genocide. And I'll leave you with one other wonderful thing that just happened in Sacramento. Assembly member Adrien Nazarian just authored Assembly Bill 1915. I wonder if that date was chosen, or that number was chosen by coincidence. Assembly Bill 1915 will mandate that in California curriculum, the Armenian genocide will be taught. So when you see Assemblymember Adrien Nazarian out and about, give him a big thumbs up because he's carrying on the fight. And again, to be fair, the opposition has been in the halls but not in the votes. The Assembly members have been supporting it. I think the Assembly Education Committee passed it unanimous, and so there is a lot of support. We're going to have to, I think it will get on the governor's desk. We're going to have to start sending our letters and writing to the governor. I do also want to touch on one national thing before I give up. Every time we have a presidential election, the question's asked. The candidates always say the right thing, and then they take the oath and they don't. That is a fair, just criticism, and we need to keep, whether it's the President of the United States, whether it's a local election, we need to keep all of our feet to the fire. And I always say the role of the activist. There's a lot of politicians that don't want to hear from you, and I'm the opposite. I think it's important. We work for you. We should hear from you. And that's the role of the activists. Make us do better. Make us do better. Whether it's on the genocide, whether it's educating our children, whether it's fixing a pothole in front of our street, make us do better. I know the elected officials who are here share that same perspective on representing. We're lucky in our area to have such fine elected officials that understand and care. And so the good news is the state of California recognizes, commemorates properly the genocide. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 12-5, historic vote for the Senate. In Pasadena, we're building a memorial, but the other side is just as active. So we have to do more. So thank you very much for letting me.
Anthony Portantino, thank you very much. Before we continue on to our next panel member, I'd like to recognize a few more individuals who represent organizations and offices. Mrs. Mary Manukian from Assembly Member Gau's office. Mr. Arik Gevorkian, no relation to me whatsoever, but a very, very dear person to me. Arik Gevorkian from Hominid Men Western Region.
He's my brother.
Mr. Steve Artignan with the Western Region of the ANCA. And Mr. Belchka Karapetyan with the ANCA Glendale chapter. And the Advisory Council of the ANCA Western Region. I'd like to pause for a moment if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask ahead of time, or if we'd like to continue moving forward and save the questions for last at any time. If you have a question, or if there's something you're really curious about, you have a compelling desire to ask a question to one of the panelists, please raise your hand and I will make sure that that happens. Moving on to our discourse, Ms. Barbara Mulvaney. Ms. Barbara Mulvaney, thank you very much for being with us here today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day. Please provide us with your expertise, your background, and your perspective on the genocide, the Armenian genocide issue.
I just want to thank you all, and I'm so humbled by being invited here. I come from a much different background than my colleagues, and I just want to share with you my journey and how I come to be sitting in front of you. And I hope that I can give you some meaningful insight on genocide around the world. I was a district attorney with the district attorney's office in Los Angeles, but in 2002, I was hired by the United Nations as a senior prosecutor for the Rwandan genocide. And at that time, I moved to Tanzania, where the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was set up. The Rwandan genocide took place in 1994, and the international community set up that tribunal shortly thereafter. When I arrived in 2002, I was put in charge of the largest case there, which was the military masterminds of the Rwandan genocide. I come to it as a trial lawyer. I do have a degree in history and international relations, but I've worked for Janet Reno in Miami, Tom Udall in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I worked at the DA's office. I'm much more of a lawyer, but I also have a background as a historian. But the Rwandan genocide, just so you know, there were 1 million people that were killed in 100 days. And so the people that I had in front of me in the courtroom were a general, 2 colonels, and a major. They were the military masterminds. The mastermind was Colonel Bagasora. And I convicted him and the others of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and rape. But what I faced there, when I got there, it was a monumental task. It was a tribunal that was set up. We had 85 different nationalities that worked in that tribunal. So we had people coming from all over the world, different languages, different religions, different cultures, different legal systems. And we all had to come together in a brand new court and present the information from the witness stand and from documents that would prove the genocide. I look at the map back there and I see the different spots where the Armenian genocide took place, and it's similar to the Rwandan genocide in that there were sites all over Rwanda. Our trial covered all of those, the genocide throughout the whole country. So it was a long process, and we had to go through all the archives. We called 242 witnesses. We spent an incredible amount of time crawling through archives, asking governments to help us with information, asking the United States government to help us with satellite photos, with satellite communications. We met resistance everywhere we went. It wasn't as if the United States government was forthcoming with a lot of their confidential communications, because as you all know, every government is trying to protect their political positions at the time. We also had that with the French government, who was very involved the perpetrators of the Rwandan genocide. And so we had to do the best we could to lay down the facts of that genocide. Through our work there, we laid a body of law, a body of facts. And then the facts have to fit into the law. So when you talk about Limken's legal definition of genocide, we're basically taking everyone's suffering and everyone's pain, putting it in front of the court, and then it has to fit into the legal structure. So what we found is, and I was just in Rwanda, so I hope you will indulge me on this, and I hope it's of interest to you because I will bring it back to the universal lessons that we've learned about genocide. But we presented people's suffering, we presented people's papers, we presented mountains of evidence, and then the court has to fit it into a legal standard. When you're talking about 800,000 to 1 million people dead, we only had 100, we had a limited amount of witnesses that could talk about these things. Even the rapes of the women, we had anywhere from 300 to 500,000 rapes that we had to prove. So it's a great body of information, and the classic legal structure that we were working within was very inadequate. So what we come away with is the first judgment that we get from the court after 6 years. This trial took 6 years. The court cuts down a lot of the facts that we had presented in front of them. A lot of what the issues with people suffering, all their personal testimonies, they cut it down to fit within the legal standards. And we understand that. But it's a constant struggle because what is the true history? What is the true findings about the genocide? Is it the facts that we presented into court, or is it the facts that the court decided we had proven under those laws? So we have a duality that we constantly see where people will say, well, the court found that there was no conspiracy to commit genocide. Well, in reality, the court did find all the facts necessary for the conspiracy, the government conspiracy to commit the genocide, because of legal. So I have such sympathy with the different genocides that have happened around the world, because in laying the record straight, it's a constant battle. It is a constant battle. And after we got done with our first judgment, well, we did get the convictions on genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and rape, but it didn't cover all of the things that I wanted it to cover. It didn't cover all of the things a historian would want it to cover. But unfortunately, that's what we're left with. Then another court of appeals on top of that came in and did their revision of what they thought the law should say. So you're left in a way with different sets of facts that are accepted on different levels. And when I was just in Rwanda for the 20th anniversary of the commemoration of the genocide, and we had a 3-day, it's actually a 4-day international conference on genocide. And before I get to that, I just want to tell you, subsequent to, before I had gone to Rwanda, I have traveled to Guatemala, and I worked on their genocide that took place in 1982. I was in Shanghai, I was in Nanjing, where I was teaching international law, and we were discussing their genocide that happened in 1937. I also worked with the Saddam Hussein judges in Iraq on the genocide that occurred in Iraq. And so everywhere I go, what I'm struck by is the patterns. And when I got to Rwanda this time, the international conference I thought was was very heartening because they were talking about not just the Rwandan genocide, but all the genocides together. And that's why I think you draw the real power, is when you look at the patterns. When you talk about, the militia, arming the militia, the identification of the enemy, the dehumanization, all the different steps that you take when a state-sponsored genocide is going to occur. And once you look at all the different areas and all the different genocides, you can also see where the international community can intervene. And to me, that's the ultimate goal. I mean, you want the remembrance, you want the acknowledgement, you want the body of facts established, you want the guilty parties to acknowledge it, to be punished, you want reconciliation. You also want to be able to analyze the different patterns so that in the future we can intervene when you see the dehumanization coming, when you see the states taking certain steps, taking away the rights of certain people. And so it was very heartening to me. The Aegis Trust is a group out of England that put together the Memorial Museum in Kigali, in Rwanda, and they are now also working with the Shoah Foundation here. And the Shoah Foundation was put together by Steven Spielberg after the Schindler's List, and he took all the testimonies of the survivors of the Holocaust. And when I was going back and forth from Los Angeles to the trial in Rwanda, I went to Shoah and I said, I'm working on the Rwandan genocide, and I think that if we can put the two together, then it gives you a good learning tool to take to children in school. You can make it more relevant to everyone. And they have a new director now at Shoah that is not only using the Rwandan genocide, but also the Armenian genocide. They're also working with the Chinese, with the Nanjing massacres. Also, they're talking about doing Guatemala. So when we all came together in Kigali last week, it was great because they brought in a huge group of American Jewish scholars that really knew nothing about the Rwandan genocide. Everybody gets hung up in their own suffering. We're all suffering, and it was interesting to see the different groups. But they brought in people from the Holocaust Museum. And once they hear about the other genocides, their eyes open wide and they realize that our suffering is the same. It's the same across the board. And what's important is to establish the facts with historic certainty for each one. And then also, as I said, to move it forward and recognize the patterns as they're coming to us in the future. One of the gentlemen that was there was a parliamentarian from the UK, and in Canada and the UK now, they have set up a genocide prevention committee within Parliament, and they are hoping to do an international network of people's committees within the Parliament or the Congress, where you exchange information on each area where genocidal acts may be brewing, but also an important part of that is establishing the historical facts of the genocide that did occur. And it was a very empowering idea, I think, that they have. And again, that one is supported by Aegis Trust also, the one in the UK. But it's a network of people, because often I'm afraid I'm going to get cut off. Often the governments, although they mean well, it's like what we said, when a politician will always tell you, we're going to make sure we have the Armenian genocide recognized. As soon as they're confronted with a situation where the military aircraft that is supporting Iraq and Afghanistan is coming out of Turkey, all of a sudden real politics takes over. And so the idea of the global network from the people's houses, you take it out, you've got the executive that's working on real politics. State Department is very much the same thing. They're looking at considerations in all different ways, but the idea of the global network of genocide prevention groups, it was having a place where the voices of civil society and activists could continually be heard, even when the real politics take over, but somewhere where the real voice of the people could come through. But I'm gonna stop here, and I hope that you ask me questions, because I just wanted to give you a brief overview of how we all fit together. And the Armenian genocide was a very big topic of discussion in Rwanda, and that was with experts from all over the world. And it was what we said, that had it been called at the time, that the Holocaust, would have been much more difficult. It may have still happened, but each time that the international community stands up, it makes it that much more difficult the next time. Thank you very much. I'm